On the podcast today, we bring on Cole Anderson. By day, he's a data scientist. He does software and sports at this point. So he is really into the data, and he focuses on goaltending, which I think is a fascinating topic because we're all trying to score more or we're trying to save more pucks. So we get into a lot of detail on this episode. He's got a lot of great data that he brings up and the way that we should be thinking about goaltending, evaluating goaltending, and even playing and trying to shoot and create better opportunities for goal scoring. So we really attack this from many different angles, and he's just a whirlwind of good quality information. I feel like most people aren't able to go into as much depth based on their job, but he does this not for his 9 to 5, so he really can dig into a lot of details. So really great one. We're going to talk a lot about goaltending, analytics, and how this fits into how we can play the game better. So without further ado, Cole Anderson. Welcome to the podcast, Cole Anderson. Really excited to have you on, talk some goaltending, some stats, some analytics, the whole 9 yards. It's going to be a great episode.
Yeah, thanks. I'm excited. And we're just wrapped up the Stanley Cup playoffs. So, we're in summer mode. We can dive deep on all these non-game to game topics, I guess.
Yeah, I mean, we're going to dive into some fun things, depth, angle, maybe some attacking shooter decisions and why maybe Carey Price is scaring people away to make a pass, but should be great. But before we get into that, how about you give us a quick background for those who might not know your story and how have you gotten to where you are in the hockey world?
Yeah, thank you. So I came from, I had a playing background. I was a goaltender. I played Division III college hockey in Massachusetts. And after that, I was Canadian. I played in the AJHL, BCHL, came down here, stayed here, got a real job, realized, I do like my day-to-day career, but I was also kind of working in, data analytics industry and realized I kind of had these skills to be able to find the NHL data, scrape it, work off of what other people have kind of done in the analytics space, and then eventually make my own models and that sort of thing. And so it's kind of like a parallel track to what my day career was, as a data scientist. And I was able to kind of look at questions that I was interested in with data, which it was kind of a powerful thing. So I've been kind of doing that off and on. I've done some consulting for a data vendor firm like SportLogic and been able to present, at different conferences. And yeah, it's just nice to be able to blend two things that I like, hockey and data, and just kind of play in that world. A big sandbox, I guess.
Huge sandbox, but I feel like you're very important in it. I remember seeing you at the Columbus Blue Jackets Hockey Analytics Conference put on by Allison Lukin, and just absolutely astonished. I was like, oh, okay, we're talking depth and angle. We're going back to the roots, but not many people are diving into the goalie data. So this is really interesting. And before we do that, I guess we should start a little bit higher level and maybe deal with your models. So you've been doing some models and putting them out on Twitter around predicting games and comparing that to the betting market. Let's just go for it. What is important for winning a hockey game?
Yeah. So I guess this is kind of two-track. This is my game probability betting track, where this is you have all this data and now you want to say what does it matter, can we predict the outcome of a hockey game, and rolling up things percentages of expected goals, for and against, rest, that sort of thing, and basically build out all the data to kind of predict the outcome of a hockey game, which is actually very difficult, and it's a good kind of test and reminder that a lot of what goes into a hockey game is luck, I guess, and that's, when I say luck, I mean there's things that we can't explain, but so the market versus the model stuff, that's just a good reminder that I have all this data that I've scraped and built features explaining Tampa Bay has, generates this much offense per game, this many goals, this, expected goals, and gives up this. Andre Vasilevsky is very good, and they're playing on 2 days rest against Montreal Canadiens. The same thing. This is 100 features for each team. But at the end of the day, and I think this is interesting, like the market that the betting markets also come up with a probability for the outcome of the game, and that's also that in theory actually should be quite close to my number. So last night, for example, Game 5 Stanley Cup Final, I had 70% for Tampa Bay Lightning, and the betting market was about 70% as well. I think that's a good reminder that public analytics probably is not used betting market data as well as they could have, in my opinion. I think it's just like a whole other set of data. You have a market, kind of generating like their predictions for the game, and so it's kind of interesting. It's almost, we could kind of go like more deep, like history, but like it's like I read this article a while ago about the market economy versus like planned economies that had the supercomputers back in the 1950s. It's kind of the two different tracks, right? Like, can we optimize how to send corn out to every every grocery store in the country of whatever country you're centrally planning, or do we have this market that just kind of adjusts everything to say this is where the corn ends up because you have all these so it's almost like two different tracks where you have this model data approach and then this market approach, and in theory they should be pretty close. If you ever see a model that says there's 50% chance of the Canadians winning, but the market is saying 70, that model is either going to make you the richest person alive or broke immediately, because it's not calibrated to the market, right? In the market, in the hockey markets are very like liquid, well calibrated markets. It's and this isn't like Wall Street, or there's no pump and dumps or anything like that. Like, this is, people are trying to get this as right as possible because that's there's a lot of incentive in it. So that's kind of the crux behind that. And so it's just a nice way to like check my work to make sure it's not crazy. And then I think it's also interesting and kind of seeing the delta between the two, because any model you really can use a model when you know what the weaknesses are, for example. So if I know that one team is over or underrated by it, now I can maybe it gets a little subjective, but at least where those weaknesses are, kind of like an expected goals model or anything, right? And so it's just kind of a tip of the hat to that idea.
So like everyone else, we can assume that the Islanders are underrated by the model, right?
Honestly, Islanders kind of gave me I was like a little worried that I thought they were a little overrated compared to the market. I feel like just like the betting market does not like the Islanders. There might just be some public money just like disliking the Islanders. I think I had them a little higher than they should have been relative to the market throughout the third round, especially versus Tampa, if I remember correctly. But I don't know if that held, or I might be misremembering. But yeah, they're a tough one to crack, no matter if you're market or model, I guess.
Yeah. So within your model, what are like the key drivers? So let's just say we have a local player or just a youth coach. What are some things that they should be concerned about that drive winning, or the things that you see in your model that truly drive putting the odds in your favor, your team's favor, to win that hockey game?
Yeah, absolutely. So, and I think this is pretty well known, but the territorial advantage, the shot advantage is kind of one of the biggest drivers of winning games, right? And this was always kind of, and it gets be a bit more of a debate now, because there's the quantity quality debate, and and then I have to be honest, the way I kind of the model out the data, there's what you're trying to do is capture non-linear parts of the model. So it's not as interpretable to say if you increase your shots per game by 2, the chances of you winning any given game go up by 1%. There's a lot of different moving parts that if you increase your shots per game but you also give up more shots, obviously that kind of net neutral. There's other ways that those interactions can work that hopefully my model's smart enough to pick up, that I allowed it to codify, because I think one thing that's interesting is when it comes to this, do you want to talented teams want to push the pace as fast as they can, and then we see Tampa, one of the better teams of our recent memory, winning games 1-0 with all the talent in the world. I think it's interesting that they can play both ways. I get the idea that, you know, if you're better, more talented, you want to increase the events per game, right? And, you know, you can win 5-4 because you're the better team and you increase sample size and all that. But there's also games where you find yourself up 1-0 and the value of a marginal goal for you isn't as much, you know, it's not as worth as much as preventing the marginal goal for the other team, and you kind of lock it down. And, you know, that's personnel, that's a lot of things. And, you know, what's at the, you know, what's right at the highest level in the world wouldn't necessarily be right for like you know, a lower level, right, where you're trying to develop players. So those are all things to you know, account for. But at the same time, like the best we can do, like you want that puck, you want the shots, you want to generate good chances. I think at the end of the day, like that's my biggest takeaway from the model. But I don't also think that's like too novel, right? I think that's something we've known for a while, for sure.
Yeah, I'm a big fan of soccer as well, and it kind of sounds like England going through the European Championships right now. Like they've got all this power up front with Harry Kane, Raheem Sterling, Phil Foden, etc. And their big thing is we don't allow any goals. They've gone through the entire tournament, 6 games now, not allowing one goal.
Yeah.
Clean sheets all the way through. So it's kind of interesting seeing a team that can play it both ways. You know, it's like the old fighting days in the NHL. Like, you know, how do you want me to beat you with my left hand or my right hand? You know, you pick.
Yep.
So that's cool. What's your thoughts on quality over quantity? I feel like when we first went through this analytics, I wouldn't say revolution, but maybe evolution, as we're getting different kind of data and better data. You know, it started with quantity. We want to throw a lot of pucks at the net, and now it's kind of tilted the other way. You got teams like the Leafs that are really looking at quality. Where do you stand on that?
Yeah, I think you know, as a former goaltender, like the teams that go the quality route, I feel like is more difficult to kind of like counteract that, right? You just don't get as many reps, you don't feel the game, so you might be sitting around for 5 minutes, but and then the extra passes will get to you. And I think that's and so I kind of did a thing for a goaltender coach like retreat where well, my greater point was that, you know, models are kind of wrong just based on, you know, you're modeling on past data, and the environment is always changing, which is one of the things I like about the sport, right? So if you take, you know, data from last year and apply it to this year, your expected goals model is going to be a little lower the last couple of years because the shots are getting more dangerous. And if we just subset to like shots right from the hash marks in the NHL, mind you, and they're forehand 20, you know, about 20 feet out, forehand 5-on-5, like just the most common type of shot, like they're going in more often than, you know, more often year over year. It's, you know, teams are finding ways to generate, you know, more quality. And I think, you know, I think that's smart. I also think the thing I like about hockey is, you know, everything kind of cyclical. Like you said, there's no one way to do it. And it could come back that, you know, there might be like a, you know, more quantity, like evolution as teams maybe hyper focus on this too much. They don't get in, you know, teams kind of are able to like counteract that. And now like, you know, maybe you find some teams are able to like reemploy like the, you know, prime LA Kings kind of grind a little bit better and just grind you out too, right? Like there's it's kind of like a, you know, rock paper scissors where, you know, rock paper beats, you know, it's kind of, you have the entire like cycle where one thing beats the another thing, but it doesn't always beat it every time, or else every team would just gravitate to one strategy, and you know that's not good for the game either, right? Like you want to see teams with like a little like different ways they play things, right? So you know, I hope it always just kind of stays like that. I hope you kind of teams are always up in it, can maybe like lead and change strategies, and hopefully new strategies always kind of work, because if we just have like everybody goes right to quality, like you're just going to see, you know, teams forcing center ice all the time, and that could get ugly if like defenses figure it out, right? A very low event, that sort of thing.
Yeah, and that's curious. And going back to just a thing you just mentioned here, you know, teams are generating more quality and finding ways to get higher quality chances, or different ways of getting at those high quality chances. for you, what are some of those ways that the teams are generating more quality or a different high quality than years past, or just what's an effective way to create quality chances?
Yeah, and I'm sure you guys have touched a lot on this podcast is like, cross ice passes, east west play, and it is really moving in that direction more than ever. And it does take a lot of skill. And I am not suggesting it's not exciting to watch. It is. It's just and that's the most effective way. And we can talk about the kind of goaltender positioning angle stuff. There's and the reason teams do that, and it's almost so obvious you don't need to mention it, is to get the goaltender moving and get the goalie off angle. And that's the name of the game right now. And that's I know goalies are working to counteract that. Sometimes there's only so much you can do. Obviously defensive structures will have to adjust as rapidly as they can, but there are very few defenses against a perfect pass, right? So yeah, and then there's different teams approach kind of layered screens and stuff like that, and so it's not none of this is new. Teams have always wanted to get lateral movement on the puck and players in front of the net and take away the goalie's eyes. I guess they're just doing it with more skill and maybe more perseverance now. They are willing to pass up two mediocre shots to get one good one. Before maybe you wouldn't see that, or some teams are at least.
Yeah, definitely. And that kind of leads us into where we're going with this, which is goaltending analytics. You already touched on the global goaltending retreat. I don't know if you want to start there, or you want to start with maybe, what are goals prevented above average? What is that stat? What does it take into account? How are you measuring goalies these days?
Yeah, good question. So and we can kind of tie those together. So goals prevented above average, goals saved above average. There's a couple different levels. It's like there's one that indexed to with save percentage, right? And so you could imagine like a league where goals are scored on the average save percentage is 90%, and you put up a 91% save percentage. If you face 100 shots, that'd be worth one goal saved above average, right? Or if you face 1,000 shots, that's 10 goals. It's basically that extra 1%, your extra 1% of your save percentage times the number of shots. So it's just like and then that's helpful because you can judge a goalie by the league save percentage in the 80s, which was much lower than it is in the 2010s, right? And then kind of the next level off of that is like the save percentage, or usually the expected save percentage. So basically goal saved above expected, and same idea. And so, maybe your expected save percentage was a 91 and you made 91% of the saves. So, your goals saved above expected is 0, right? And then there's other different little layers. I prevented is one I do. You can also add a rebound adjustment in. Essentially you have an expected number of rebounds. And one thing that, I found with expected goals is rebounds are kind of noisy and big, right? They're very weighty, but they're somewhat random. So if you can smooth those out, you can kind of say that if you prevent rebounds, you're also preventing goals, right? But I guess the point is that none of these are vastly different between goalies. If you have a good save percentage, goals saved above expected, and you'll probably have a good goals prevented above expected. There just might be a little on the margins difference between certain goalies that have a tougher environment or help themselves by preventing rebounds or that sort of thing. And so that's where some of the work I did for the Goalie Guild goalie retreat this year. Justin Goldman runs it. He's awesome. Look him up, the Goalie Guild. He has scholarships for I think they had they're voting on scholarships right now. So if you know any goalies, look that up. I think I shared it a little while ago, or look up the Goalie Guild and look for that. So this year and it's a bunch of goalie coaches. So the thing we're trying to communicate there is take the analytics, probabilistic thinking, and say, okay, why would goalies or goaltender coaches or parents care, right? That's not always super easy, but what I talked about this year is just kind of puck luck, random variance, and actually one thing I looked at, or I sent out a questionnaire of asking why do we think we don't see like year to year like strong correlations between goaltender like results, right? So these metrics we just talked about, goal save above expected, that sort of thing. The top in year one aren't necessarily going to be the top in year two, and that's fine. And we just wanted to kind of take a pulse of why that is. And we looked, I kind of, the population of goalies at the NHL level are all very good. That's one. Luck, team effects, the nature of the position is kind of a cyclical, like injuries and confidence. And then also like, I think we talked about a little bit is like, there's more ways that a goalie can affect the game than just making saves, right? And so goals saved above expected, that's great. But like a good goaltender is going to have more impact on the game than just like making a save or not, right? The game is about not letting in goals. It's not about actively making a save, right? And there's a difference between those two.
So I'm very curious about when you're talking about rebounds. So there's an expected rebounds per shot. What is that number, and is it changed based on the shot location itself or the situation? Like per 100 shots, how many rebounds should be kicked out?
Yeah, and it's a weaker model. Money Puck does something similar with public data, mind you. And I have a rebound model with public data. About rebounds are fairly rare, believe it or not, and the definition is about 2 seconds after a shot, another shot occurs. You can extend that to 3, but essentially that's the definition. It's about half as common as a goal, so about 3 to 4% of shots or shot attempts will occur have a rebound associated with it. The probability of a goal, if the offensive team does get to that puck, it's about a quarter of the time it goes in. So if you do get to a rebound, it's like a mini power play on your stick for one shot, right? So they are, but the problem is when you're measuring by expected goals, and you can imagine like you're measuring a defenseman by expected goals. If they're out there for 2 rebounds, no fault of their own, or just something freaky happens, or maybe they are on the ice and their team gets 2 rebounds, that's a half a goal in expected goals right there. Maybe that takes them from a 45 expected goal to like a 65 expected goal share. Do you know what I mean? Like it adds a lot of noise at the one game level. I think over the course of the season, all that stuff evens out. But when you're in shorter periods where expected goals are kind of your metric of choice, it can add a lot of noise just because they are so like, it's about the average rebound will be about a 0.25 expected goal. They go in about a quarter of the time. So that it's good to like kind of maybe, think about that and think how you can like maybe, dampen some of that, the noise you might get from that.
That's very curious. You're saying only 4% of shots really have a rebound associated with them. So that's very low. That's like 1%. That leads me to believe that point shots really are terrible. I mean, the NHL makes them look a lot better because their shots are ridiculously good, but at the lower levels, you really probably want to be passing up those types of shots.
Yes and no. I mean, I think it's interesting. So yeah, you're saying if you take 100-point shots, 4 will turn into rebounds, and then 1, yeah. It's interesting. I haven't gone into the point shot debate too much. One thing that I'm always kind of hesitant to like declare too much is if I have a point shot, but I'm shooting for a tip and it doesn't get tipped, it's going to register as a very low probability of a goal, right? Or 1% or whatever. But if that does get tipped, now you're up to like, 16% or 20%, right? So, what's the probability of if you take that point shot, is it going to get tipped? Is it 50%? Then, maybe it's a good shot because you average the 2 and it's maybe, so I just don't think we have really enough data, and if we knew the shooters and the defensemen's intentions or what they were actually doing, I feel like the data doesn't necessarily do that justice. Directionally, yes, you're probably absolutely right. There are too many point shots. A lot of times they are just kind of, you feel like maybe they're just punting it to get off the ice, right? Like, or just they don't know what else to do. They don't want to make a play. That's kind of my nuance to that. anytime I kind of see that in the data, or I see that analysis, I'm like, whoa, what if there was a stick here and you're inches away from like connecting with a deflection? That changes the expected goals completely. I think that, and I think that's true of other situations for, in and around the net. I mean, there was a goal I think Price gave up earlier in the playoff, maybe Vegas, and it was a Riley Smith goal, and I don't know if you'll remember, but is shot wide, and Riley Smith tipped it in, and it was beautiful deflection, awesome play. And he had two ways to play it. Price did. He could either push back to his post and play the deflection, which would have been like a 10 bell save, maybe like a 0.3 or 30% like expected goal, or because the puck wasn't that wide, it was kind of tight, backdoor, but still kind of tight to, where the crease was. You could kind of knock it off with it, maybe get a stick on it. And that's what Price tried to do and didn't. It was a little tricky because it was on the blocker side. But you can imagine he makes that save, deflects it in the corner, or, he reaches out like maybe a foot past where the post is, deflects in the corner. Gets marked down as a shot, 1% probability. So I just think that the way deflections are and the traffic in front, like I think it's a multi-level game, right? I don't think you can just say like point shots are necessarily bad. And I also think that the way goalies can play it can also influence exactly what kind of like chance gets registered, if that makes sense, if that example makes sense. I think I went back, I posted on Twitter. I forget. It's the days are running together here.
Yeah. I remember that play exactly, and it was going to his blocker side. So he was sliding to his right.
He did try to cut it off, which is, I think, the right play. I think to get back to the post would have been like an amazing play. And it was such a good shot, and just kind of missed the blocker. It was just kind of interesting. Like, what do you do, right? You have to make a quick, and you can kind of tell it's an instinctual play. That's just how he plays it. If he was like a Darcy Kemper or somebody that played on his goal line, maybe it's a little bit different. You're probably just going to like push back because you're already on the goal line, but that's not how Price plays.
Exactly. He's the guy who likes to cut down the depth.
Yep.
And challenge a shooter. So let's jump back to this here in a bit, but let's go a little bit to your CBJ Analytics conference presentation. When we were talking exactly about this, and you really dove into it, the trade-off between depth and angle. Like, Carey Price is a guy who likes to get depth, really challenge a shooter, versus Kemper or Lundqvist that really likes to sit deep and try to take away angles a lot better. I'll let you go from there.
Yeah, exactly. So this is, lucky enough, CBJ hack, Allison put on, it was awesome. It's the last thing I did before the pandemic. So that was cool. So I was consulting with Sportlogic. So I had this tracking data, right? And you have that's kind of the opportunity to say, we ask these questions, or there's a lot of things that, maybe, institutional knowledge about goaltending, how they play, depths and angles, and that kind of managing that trade-off. But can we start to model that with data? And that's kind of what I did for that project. And so essentially what we had is, just coordinates for all the players on the ice, including the goalie, and measuring where the goalie is in relation to the puck, and invented like Sportlogic data. So where the goalie is in relation to the puck or the event that's happening, and the net, which thankfully doesn't move. And then just kind of measuring their strategies, and how each goalie kind of has their own strategy, measuring the trade-off between depth and angle. So just so everybody's, just the terminology's the same for everybody. Like the aggressiveness, like we were talking about, like the depth off the goal line, how far out you're playing. And you got exactly right. Price is one of the more aggressive goalies. And then your Lundqvist, Kemper, Mike Smith, these guys are very conservative, play closer to the goal line. Why do you do that? Because we were talking all the east-west plays, teams trying to get goalies off their angle, and the further out you play, the tougher it is. So, if you have to go dot to dot, or like one side of the ice to the other, if you're playing further off your goal line, that's a bigger push. It's a longer distance to travel if you're playing more aggressively. But why do you play more aggressively? You just you're bigger, you're challenging the puck, you're taking up more net as that play envelops. And you know, we kind of see, so it's just like a cat and mouse game, right? So once we had that modeled, we were able to say, okay, let's take a look at all the attacking events. So passes or shots in the attacking zone, and use that goaltender depth as, you know, input to the model to say, you know, will shooters, you know, be more likely to shoot or not if the goalie's challenging? And, you know, sure enough, the more the goalie challenges, the more likely they are to pass. And we saw that the Stanley Cup winning goal by last night for Tampa, Ross Colton, that was a play where Savard had the puck, Price challenged, and, you know, Savard was not going to shoot that. He didn't really have a play on the shot, and, you know, he passed backdoor, and, you know, that was a great play, great pass, and, you know, Colton beat his man to get that shot off. But and so you can kind of, we were talking about, like, now the goaltender strategy comes into it, right? If that was Mike Smith, like, maybe Mike Smith gets beat up top, you know, maybe Savard takes that shot. And so it's just like all these sort of like different wrinkles to this shooter goaltender like strategy game that, you know, I think it was awesome to be able to look at it. We did need tracking data. For example, you know, we ended up measuring like goaltender position as a function of other things going on the ice. So I think like if we take a look at that like goal last night, I think Price trusted his defenseman there. But if that was a 5-on-3 or something like that, and there was a weak side guy that was open, you know, maybe he doesn't challenge that. And so just trying to like capture that with tracking data, building like passing lanes and trying to like quantify that and kind of build a comprehensive picture of like what might be going into a decision by a shooter and a goalie and how those things kind of work in tandem. And I thought it was, you know, fun project, and I was excited to be able to like present it to you guys at CJ Hack there.
Yeah, it was awesome. I loved seeing the graphics and everything that went along with that. But say someone's never seen your work there, they weren't at CBJ Hack, you know, what is the one thing that you would want them to remember from your work, from the presentation? Yeah, just something that you would want someone to remember that has never seen that work, but is interested in this trade-off between depth and angle, shooting, the shot decisions, all that.
Oh, that's a really good question. It is, there was some work in there that just kind of like suggested that there was that trade-off between depth and angle. The further out you challenge, the tougher it is to get and maintain on angle. The more conservative you play, the easier it is to maintain and get on angle. That said, one thing I try to do, but just kind of ran into time issues, is like you're not covering as much net. So that's not really an answer because that wasn't in there. But you know, just trying to structure it where this is stuff coaches talk about all the time, but now we have the data to kind of back it up, even though, you know, there's other like applications. There was like some expected goals applications in there. I think we've all seen like, you know, a play, I mean, around the net where, you know, a shooter will just whack a puck into the goalie's pads. It'll register good expected goals, but like we know it's not going to go in. And, you know, if we know where the goaltender is positioned, like the expected goals model gets a little smarter. So there's that work too. That's a really bad answer. But you know, it's one of those things. It's just like, sometimes you just like to sit around, you know, talk hockey for a while. And I think it's one of those things that kind of facilitates it because it has a little bit of strategy. It has a little bit of analytics and a little bit both together. So.
Fair enough. This is complex stuff, even though everyone thinks it's so easy and straightforward, but actually proving it with data is a lot more challenging than people give it credit for. So we'll let you off the hook on that one.
Appreciate it.
Yeah, absolutely. So going back to what we were talking about earlier with the global goaltending retreat, it was Justin Goldman, right?
Yep.
The writer of the phenomenal book, The Power Within. If you're a goalie, you have to read The Power Within. If you're a shooter, you should read it anyways, just because you need to understand what goalies are thinking and how they're processing things.
Oh yeah. I mean, that's half the battle. That's why the CBX stuff was was what it was, is because like, yeah, no, goalies are, I think we're students of the game in a different way. And I think that, much like, we try to understand what shooters are doing, I think it's advantageous for shooters and not just that, like shooters, but coaches to understand the finer points of like goaltending too. It's a little slower. It's a little bit more strategic. It's like rapid, it's rapid chess in a way. There's a little less flow. There's some more rules, but if you understand those rules as like a position player or a coach, then it becomes, things make sense. It's not, it's not, it's like that for a reason, but it can be advantageous when you're, devising strategy or shooting, or kind of have an innate feel for like what's happening, what the goalie's trying to do to counteract what you're doing, right?
Yeah, and I love messing with the goalie on their plant and push foot. I think that's a lot of fun, and you always see a goalie swear when you get them 5-hole just perfectly. A
Yeah.
little jealous that I'm a righty, not a lefty. There can really get them on that push leg going from their right to the left.
That is
But
the worst.
it is what it is.
Yeah, yeah. No, it's there's being skilled and there's being smart. So, and if you can be both, even better. So.
Absolutely. So we touched on this, and you had that great phrase about it's not about actively making saves, but rather preventing goals. Saves are great, but preventing goals is the real thing that we're trying to do here. So what are some ways that goalies are affecting the game beyond just making saves? And then, how can you go about quantifying that, or how have you gone about quantifying that?
Yeah, let's go with the first one first, because you do kind of a rabbit hole, and I would say that, given if I was thrown in my basement, which I've been trapped in anyways, with all this tracking data and months to work on it, I would still struggle to really come up with like a clean answer. But it's good to kind of think through it, like I would as a goalie or an athlete or coach, where goalies impact the game more than just saves, because one, like the obvious one is rebounds. Like, are you cleaning up rebounds? Are you not like giving second chances when you don't need to? Anytime I see a puck bobbled and the puck goes back into play, even if there's not shot right after, like, your defenseman might be tired. You might get a cycle going against you, that sort of thing. It's now all of a sudden you see it, you're like, all right, this is kind of on the goalie, not much. Like, obviously there's 5 other defenders on the ice, 4 or 5 other defenders on the ice, but like, this is a way that they could have helped their team by getting a whistle. And same idea, like, transition plays, short transition plays of their defense. I think the big thing, it's a very lightning rod topic. Goalie, this happened a couple times this playoffs, quite notably, like Jari, like turning it over in overtime against the Islanders. Goalies play the puck, and then there's always some like, goalies should never play the puck. Why do they play the puck? Like, only bad things can happen, which is kind of true when, there's these big splash plays. But at the same time, there's a lot of little effective ways that you as a goalie can help, like, facilitate, breakouts. And so, like, you should always like be able to put it on like the forehand, your defenseman's forehand. When you catch a rim, you set it nicely, like little things, that attention to detail that most people wouldn't notice, but like those things compound and add up, right? And making little passes behind the net. A lot of times you'll see kind of the defenseman split out wide, and there's just like you have the forechecker come in, they get caught in no man's land, and that's just like little effective things that's kind of the ice, the 90% of the iceberg under the water, right? That nobody really sees, because like that's kind of the boring stuff of the game, right? Like, there's just been a dump, the goalie gets it, like, all right, I'm gonna go get a beer or something like that. I'm not coming to watch like the 1-2-2 forecheck, right? So but that's just like being in control of the game. And I just, as a goaltender, I always felt like if I was like making those little plays, if I was like, getting whistles when I wanted to get whistles, or, not giving up rebounds, like, now I'm in control of the game, and it's just like a snowball effect. You have the other way, if every shot against is an adventure, and, you're not getting whistles, you're getting tired, legs, your tired legs still out there, like that's also snowballs. Like, now all of a sudden you had one shift that was 2 minutes long before, like, maybe don't get scored on, but like, that stuff compounds over the game. So those are kind of, little things that, my mind goes to. How do you test it? Well, it gets a little bit more difficult. Like you don't always want to take a whistle, right? Like sometimes you have like, you want to keep like momentum going. So you want to play to your defenseman. So it becomes a goalie that's, in tune with the game. You understand the flow of the game. You understand what like how your defensemen are thinking, or how your wingers are thinking, your centermen are thinking, and you're able to like riff off of that. Like, I think that's where it needs to be. Like there's a lot of goalies that came up that are like goalie school goalies that don't understand anything about playing the game of hockey. They don't make it to the NHL. Like the goalies that make it to the NHL understand, like have a holistic view of the game, and they're able to like kind of roll with that. How do you quantify some of those things? I mean, you could maybe like, it's kind of like eating an elephant. Like, can start with rebound control. Okay. A better data set than public data, be able to like build out models for that better. And then, passing, expected passing, that was something else that was at CJ Hack, expected passing models. We talked about like the rims and stuff like that. That does get a little bit trickier. Goalies getting out and like making, putting the puck in a good place for the defenseman. But those are all like little components. But at the same time, like scouts kind of pick up on that sort of stuff too. It's just like, do they think the game in the right way? Are they making like are they making life easier in your team, right? And another way is and this is tougher. I always kind of was responsible for calling out defensive zone, misreads or breaks and coverages, right? So if somebody gets free in the upper slot, or somebody, we want three guys high in the, three people high in the offensive zone, but we only have two, like it's kind of on me to say, okay, we want a third man high, or we want F3 high, or we need somebody in the slot. Like you're kind of like calling the plays back there. You're covering for your defenseman. If they don't see what you're seeing, like it's on you to call. That's tougher to quantify, but like again, I don't want a shot like teed up from the slot, right? Like I'm not trying to boost my save percentage that way, right? So I think it's on you to kind of like take initiative there and be part of the defensive unit, opposed to just the person that sits back there and makes saves, right?
Yeah, and when you're talking about preventing rebounds, are you more so saying that just making sure you're sucking in those pucks and getting a whistle on it, or just like putting the pucks higher on the glass? There's more time for defensemen to make plays. What is better rebounds or rebound prevention to you?
Yeah, great question. So I know with public data, we have like freeze rates. So that's one. And I think that's pretty valuable. I think they're a good proxy. There are plays where you want to punch it out to your team. Like if you have, 3 or 4 people back, and it's an easier shot, and you're able to like punch it out with your blocker or something like that. And so they can skate into it to turn it up. Yeah, that's a great play. That's a good rebound. And I think that some of that takes like tracking data, and advanced venting data. I know like Sportlogic had more advanced invented data for like what time of rebounds they were. We don't have that with public data currently. So again, it's just one of those things. It's bit by bit, and I think that. But I think it's interesting. Like when we're talking about the goaltender retreat, like we're presenting to a bunch of goaltender coaches. How do you like they already know all this stuff, right? Like they talk about this stuff all day, every day. I think it's more like maybe hockey operations where this goalie is good. This goalie, maybe makes things more difficult for themselves, but it's also on the margins, right? Like you're not going to not acquire a good goalie because their, rebounds are a little less than, ideal. But, I guess maybe it's something you think about. More work needs to be done in that area for sure. But from a quantitative and a qualitative, I think goalie coaches are breaking down film on this all the time. They're very attuned to like every shot that's taken. Trust me. So I think it'd be tough for you to like barge the room and say, okay, this model shows your goalies giving up too many rebounds, or they're not they're not letting their players skate onto it. Like I'm sure they're breaking that down quite a bit. But maybe this is a way to like directionally like see who's helping and who's hurting themselves when you can't watch all 30 teams every night, I guess.
All right. Well, let's go down that rabbit hole. Let's say that you're now an NHL GM. You've got this data. Say you're consulting with Sports Logic. Um, are you trying to draft one goalie per draft? Um, and I guess where we're going with this is, are there opportunities to get value in the draft where people are overlooking it? Because obviously you can see the very good forwards, the very good defense, and very good goalies and project them easily.
Yeah.
But everyone's talking about how goalies are voodoo, and you mentioned it earlier on the podcast, how year to year it's very difficult. Like you could have a phenomenal draft year, but maybe that was, not exactly relation to your true talent level or how you're developing. How do you go about finding that value? Are there opportunities later in the draft? What are you looking at to see and put a good bet? You're a betting man. How do I put a good bet on a goaltender to turn out to be a good pro?
I do. I think that's a great question, and it probably varies based on, organizational philosophy. And one thing I do kind of back up to,
you are the GM. This is your organization. How would you
I was just going to say, well, pizza party every Friday. How about no. So there's a couple different ways. Like when I mentioned like indexing, goals saved above average, you can also do replacement, and that actually gets you a little bit more like repeatability. I don't necessarily. I buy the notion that goaltenders are, and this is actually what I talked about the goalie guild retreat. Like there are ways that maybe we are kind of underselling the repeatability of goaltenders. Obviously, when things blow up, they really blow up. Like Carter Hart this year, wow, statistically profiled like he was going to be have an awesome year, young, coming off early success, and it didn't work out for him. But Hellebuck, Vasilevsky, these guys were top of the league a couple of years in a row. I think from an organizational perspective, I think you need to identify the best talent you can at the forward and D positions and take big swings there. I also think that if depending on your optimization choice, just to get a forward, get a forward that's playable in the bottom half of your lineup, say, and get to 100 or 150 games, wherever that ELC number is. I think you might be doing yourself a disservice if you see somebody that you think can be like an organizational game changer. Like Vasilevsky was drafted in the first round, and I the money puck or money ball would have suggested, one, don't draft this guy. Try to get somebody that maybe can fill out like a third line role. But we kind of go back to the betting idea. Like, yes, it's a little bit riskier for a goaltender, but when you hit, if you hit, like you hit big, right? And so it'll be interesting to see where like Nashville is in a couple of years after taking goalie high. And there's the young Swede this year. And then I also think that when we do like data analysis, and this is where I would probably need to like dive into the data myself, because I haven't done it, and I'm just kind of talking off, going off the top of my head here. But like, it's no secret that a lot of teams have not developed are not invested in goaltender development throughout like the history that like the NHL. So when you do any like analysis of like past draft trends, you have to view it in the context of how like teams have operated, which for a lot of them, like, yes, they might have picked a goalie high, and yes, they may have flamed out. By the way, I don't think it's like anything worse in the recent years. It's not worse than other positions. I think that there was some big failures in like the early 2000s from like DiPietro and whatnot, but I also don't think that they got enough support. And so as we kind of see teams get smarter of handling goalies and have goaltender departments, I think the kind of inputs to like the inputs from like draft to NHL career are changing as well. So I don't know if those connections that the Ricky DiPietro draft onwards, I don't know if that's as relevant anymore. It might be. And I know that there's only 32 starters in the league at any given year. And so I don't think that's ever going to change. But I do think that, evaluation of goaltenders has a long way to go, and development of the goaltenders has a long way to go. So if those are getting better, that maybe that data earlier, doesn't matter as much. But we just saw like a first round pick, go back-to-back cups, and but then again, Hellebuck was picked in the 5th round. That was one of those cases where he was a late bloomer, and you can still be a late bloomer as a goaltender. And so, there's definitely maybe ways to get an advantage still, but I don't think teams, I hear the don't draft a goalie in the 1st round thing, but it's, I think the rules might be changing a little bit. And if you, commit to any strategy too much, I think the game is cyclical and smart enough to maybe like move past that, if you know what I mean.
Yeah, absolutely. And appreciate your time here. So we'll wind this down a little bit, but just piggybacking off that, a team does invest in their goaltending development. How should they develop their goalies well?
Yeah, well, that's a whole other podcast, and frankly, probably something I'm not an expert in at all. I think when I think of there's so many great goaltender coaches out there, and there are more resources being invested. I think there's a balance between getting game time, making sure that health is a big concern with like wear and tear on hips and managing those minutes and almost like I'm not a huge baseball fan, but well enough to know like how the pitchers are maybe being treated a little bit differently than they were 20 years ago. I think so. Kind of coming together of like that technical development, understanding the game, like kind of like that like hockey IQ, and making sure that like the physiological, like there's not any, like there's some teams that like their practices are you hit a certain number of butterflies or RVH, like post integration plays, you're done, right? Like teams are getting smarter about that sort of thing. So hopefully, the goalie that kind of falls apart at, age, 32, hopefully we're moving past that because teams have been managing like, managing hips and knees better in their younger years. So yeah, that's certainly a great question. And it's one that we'll know more with more, more focus on that area coming in the coming years.
All right, wonderful. Last question for me. So slightly back to the depth versus angle trade-off. You're building out your ideal goaltending pair. So you got to say a 1A, 1B type situation. Do you want something kind of like Vegas where you've got Flower and Leonard that are kind of playing it differently with the depth versus angle, or you just say, I want the best one with athletic goalies. I don't care how they get it done. Or is there almost an advantage because you can choose, do we want a goalie that's going to come out and challenge against the XYZ team versus maybe, okay, I want you to stay deeper because we're playing the Capitals and Ovechkin's over there on the one time and you need to make sure you at least give yourself a chance?
Yeah, that's a great question. And I don't know, because I think you have, for all the considerations of your opponent, so maybe you end up in a 7-game series with Washington or somebody that kind of which is funny because Washington attacked Fleury pretty good for his kind of aggressiveness in the 2018 Stanley Cup Finals, and Fleury's actually kind of changed his little game a little bit. I don't know. I think because you only play each team like a couple times a year, and then the playoffs obviously get paired up, but like I think there's also consideration for your like own defensive structure. And it would be, you at least have some sort of understanding between goalies how they're going to play it for the defenseman. So I don't know if that's easier if each goalie is the same, or so I would love to talk to like Petrolangelo or some of those Vegas D, like how do they kind of interpret it, right? Because and Fleury has calmed down a little bit, but you kind of have one wild man and then the other pretty conservative there. So I do think that's actually a very interesting question. As a manager, I think you do like to have some sort of, if I was putting a team together, I would actually appreciate having like contrasting styles for the reasons you mentioned, but maybe my coach and defense course kind of thinks different. So that's a great question.
Awesome. Well, thank you for coming on. I appreciate that. I'll give you 2 minutes to plug anything you want to talk about, whether it be professionally, something maybe we didn't talk about or touch on here, just ways to find you.
Yeah. Well, you can find me on Twitter, Ice Cold Data. And then range hockey is something I'm getting started this year. It's basically just for like all like betting related stuff. I think I've kind of mentioned a couple times like at these like coaches conferences, and they're like, I'm like, oh yeah, I'm doing like betting things. They look at me like forehead. So I think I'm like separation of church and state. So if you whatever you find interesting, feel free to reach out, follow along, and then like we talked about, like if you have a curiosity for the position, or it's good to develop a curiosity for the position. I think goaltending is probably more interesting than a lot of people in hockey give it credit for. And same if you're a goalie and you're listening to this too. Like, I think that there's so much value in learning kind of, defensive structure and, offensive, tactics and that sort of thing. So, cause I do kind of, it is one of the things we don't talk about enough, is just kind of like that, game of cat and mouse between the goalie and shooter and the opposing team. And it's kind of where my eye always gravitates towards. So, just kind of reach out and learn a little something about the person that you're facing or having to face, and it'll pay dividends and be interesting for sure.
Absolutely. Make sure to find the ways to score on your goaltending buddies 5-hole. Really get them going.
They love it. They love it.
That's my favorite part. You get a goalie going and then they can't stop swearing or they can't stop freaking out and they get in their own heads. And
I have no idea what that's like. I've never sworn or gotten upset getting scored on. So I feel bad. I feel bad for those people, but they do exist, I hear.
Fair enough. Well, thanks again, Cole, for coming on. This was a wonderful episode. I know I learned a few things, and I know our listeners are going to take a bunch away. So thanks again for coming on.
Thanks, Greg. Thanks for having me.
All right. Take care.
Bye.
Well, I hope you enjoyed that episode. I know I did. So before we let you go, though, we'd like to remind you to please like our podcast, subscribe to it, give us a follow, and share this with all the hockey people in your life. We really appreciate growing this community, this podcast. Remember, we also have a newsletter, the Hockey IQ newsletter as well. Really excited to continue to grow this. So please help us grow this further by liking, subscribing, following, and sharing with everyone. So appreciate you all. Take care.